All right, well, I'm going to work on a watch that's going to end up on my website. It's a 1976 6138 Kakume. So it's this watch here. There's the case. It's a yeah, February 76 6138 0030. It's a very nice original watch. But I wanted to take everybody sort of through my restoration process, the parts that you don't get to see on the rest of the videos. Effectively, I've already torn down the watch and cleaned it, and so this is my sort of knolling process of how I get things going for my restorations and my service. I have a watch cleaning machine that has these 3 baskets where I put the parts, and so larger parts, medium-sized parts go in here, and then I have a basket for wheels and a basket for screws, and then other larger components, and then of course main plates and things go in the bottom. And this stacks up and goes in a carrier that's then placed into the watch cleaning machine, which has solutions that clean the components. So after they get dried, I put them in these containers, which allow me to sort of keep track of all the parts and pieces that I need to in order to get the watch back together. And so my process is basically to regionalize the watch. So there are different components here that are parts of the chronograph feature, for example. So these are levers and the hammers and the springs. This is for 6138. This is the part that goes under the secondary plate that's under the calendar works. And then of course you've got bridges and cocks and plates and things, and all of the wheels for the chronograph, and the watch function here, date and day, and covers, and then we have main plates and other things over in this one. And what this allows me to do is, as I'm working, I can be more efficient in the way that I put things together, because I ensure that all the screws for these particular parts are with the parts that they go with before I start to reassemble. And so that means that I don't have to search around for things prior. I also take the time to put the barrel back together, put mainspring in. If it needs to be replaced, it can be replaced, but that's all back in. I still have 2 die-shock jewels that need to be lubricated and put back, of course, in this tray, so that they can be put in for when the hairspring and the balance are put back in. But I just thought I would entertain you with a little bit of my process, and that way, for those who are getting a watch done, they know, how I'm able to get things in a somewhat more efficient way as I work through putting the pieces together. And there's no real steps other than to know that this region here is going to have to be a big one, and I'm going to have a lot of small parts that are all together, and you can see there are some spaces here for things that I still have to put in, like the balance is still being cleaned and some other things. So yeah, that's sort of the way I do it, and I don't know if it's other watchmakers' ways, but this is how I proceed. And then I can keep everything covered. These are stackable, so I can make sure everything, if I need to take a break or anything like that happens, I can just stack them up and wait. And I also have one here that is part of this as well. This is the dial, and all the hands and everything sort of go into this, and then I can, of course, if I start this process late in the day and I need to go for the night, I'm pretty confident to know that this is safe and sound and clean, and there's no dust or anything getting in, so that makes it a little bit better for me. All right, well, we're going to get into putting this watch back together, and it's going to be on the website. Hopefully one of you will find it appealing, and we'll go from there. All right, it's time to put a watch together. Okay, so now it's time to start with the actual build of the watch. So with the 6138, there's an enormous hole in the main plate where, for normal 6000 series watches or movements, the barrel lower mainspring arbor port jewel would sit. For the 6138s, they have a secondary plate that is on the calendar side, which is below the calendar, which sits on just on the other side of this plate, that conceals and contains all of the components of both the keyless works and the necessary components for the hour recording wheel of the chronograph. And because of that, they had to actually put the lower mainspring arbor port in this plate. And so this plate has in it a jewel that locates that arbor. And so that has to get in place before I can build out the train components. But because this covers the actual cannon pinion and the hour wheel, I have to put the component that attaches to the cannon pinion in first. So I first start on the train side and I put the center wheel in place. So that requires lubrication of this jewel and lubrication of the center wheel itself. So we put one component in on the train side, and then we move over to the calendar side, or the actual, what was the calendar side on the standard watch, but is now the chronograph components for the hour recording wheel. Alright, so I'm just checking the center wheel to make sure there's no fuzz or any other material that could be attached to it. And so we lubricate the top here. And then we put a component that holds it in place. And the reason I do this is because I could build out the train, but that would mean that the mainspring wouldn't have anything to center its lower jewel or its lower arbor. And so that to me seems not the best way to start. I think that everything should be supported in a way that's, giving the best possible location of all the components. To begin with. Alright, so there's our screw. Holds the center wheel cock in place. Okay, so let's just check for function, make sure this isn't tight, which it is not, so that's good. It freely spins. Alright, so let's switch movement holders here to a slightly better one for holding the movement on the calendar side. This build out is somewhat tricky. There's lots of little components. Here is the region that builds out the hour recording. This is of course the keyless works area, and there are some other components that sit on this side of the bridge, or the side of the movement. So I generally like to start off by building the keyless works because there are components that go over top of it. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so we move to some heavier lubrication here. These are not train components, but they do move on pivots, and so we have to lubricate them to make sure that everything is nice and happy. Okay. Here's our winding pinion. So with this movement. You do have hand winding, which is very nice. And with that comes a pinion, essentially a set of gears and teeth, intermesh, so you have to lubricate that intermesh of those gears that are held together with a spring. And then I like to grab my crown and stem, and I do it in this way that allows me to slide this in place. I put my first component on. And then I can slide the second component on. And I lubricate the teeth, interact with the intermediate wheel that drives the minute wheel. And then that goes in place. Good. Okay, now I can put in the lever setting. Okay. Now this interacts through a frictional contact, so I generally put some lubrication here and on here. I will also lubricate the spring that holds that down. Okay. Okay, let's put our yoke. Put our spring in place. You always have to be very careful with these compression springs because they do want to jump to the other end of the universe, which is oftentimes far away from where you're working. And it's very difficult to find them once they've done that. Unfortunately, I'm ill-prepared. New piece of pegwood. All right. So that should hold that down. Now hopefully this will all slide into place easily and not fly apart at the first opportunity. So I like to lubricate these components here and the bottom of this where it interacts with your setting lever. Okay. So this has to tuck under here ever so slightly and then find its way down. Into place. That's it. Now we can place its screws in. Of course, I'm not 100% sure that's the right order, but that's the order that works for me to ensure that everything finds its place. Now the reason I've convinced myself that this placing of the center wheel and then building out these components is at least reasonable is that Seiko gives you a way, once you've done all of this and actually put this plate on top that holds the calendar works, you can get to these jewels that you need to lubricate once you build out everything. Now you could lubricate them from the other side, but I don't think that's the way Seiko originally intended. So everything's got a hole so you can access even this plate here, which sits over top to hold everything down. I do want to put a little lubrication here on this set of wheels where they slide. Okay. There's a screw that goes here. I worked on a watch the other day, and this was badly damaged and wasn't doing its job, so I had to replace it. This one seems to be, at least while this is down, let's push that down. So the plate holds this component down, and then I can flip back and forth between the day and the date. Day, date, day, date. Quick set. Okay, so that's the keyless works built. Let's go ahead and, while we're in here, let's put our minute wheel in place. Like it's slight amount of lubrication, and our cannon pinion, which also gets lubrication. Cannon pinion is the critical piece that connects the train of wheels to the calendar side, and all the other components for setting are linked to that. So we put that in, and then we put our minute wheel in, make sure they're enmeshed together. And then there's a intermediate wheel that sits in this orientation, and then our lubrication again, and then our hour wheel that sits here. Okay, so that's everything to do with winding and date changeover built out on this side. Next is components that make up the hour recording wheel. So you have your wheel itself, then there are a series of springs and levers that act as the reset, and also act to connect this side of the watch to the other side of the watch where the operating levers are for the chronograph. So there's a pin that sticks through one of these levers. So that's the spring. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and take this out for just a sec. All right, now this shared post has both the wheel, or this lever here actually is a braking lever, so when the chronograph is not engaged, it's able to hold the wheel in place stop it from turning. And then this piece, which I call Kokopelli, which looks like a little dancing person, is the connector that goes from this side of the watch to the operating levers of the chronograph. And that turns this on and off. So here we go. Let's get that pushed in place. So I compress the spring. It should drop down. And then they're both engaged by that same spring. Okay. Now I can put the chronograph wheel in its spot. And there we go. Okay. Everything's a bit under tension, so it's a little bit easy to knock them out of their collective component places. Now this lever is part of the operating levers for reset. That one drops onto this post, which needs to be lubricated, of course. And then there's another post here, and those are held fixed by a spring. So it's this long set of levers that take action from the reset all the way over to the other side of the movement to reset the heart on the chronograph wheel. There, that slips into place. Then there's another very thin lever that goes across here. Right. Now there's a spring that holds everybody fixed in place. So it starts here and ends here. Okay, so that's these set of components built out. And now we need to drop in our die shock. Okay, so now our die shock is in place, and we can actually start to put the other plate on, so we can locate our position of the lower mainspring arbor port. Now the challenge here is to align things such that you're not taking the position of that that wheel too much out of its normal spot. So that's really important. The hard thing is, if you have to put this on while the train's in place, you've actually got another pin or another pivot to locate. That's really tough. Okay, so now that's in place, we can check function. So this will be the reset. That works great. Cool. Okay, so next are these three distinct screws, which have a kind of domed head and are a little bit longer. They're the only ones in the Seiko line of screws that look like this, specific to the 6138s. Right. Okay, so everything looks the way it should. That's good. Two more screws. Good. And let's just check function again. It's always a good practice to go through and make sure while you have things in the process, make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do, so you're not pinching or leading to any issues. Okay, So that now means we're ready to go ahead and flip over and build out the train of wheels. So we could build out the calendar, but again, if there are issues we have to take care of, it's always good to be able to have as minimum number of components in the train and in the action of the watch. So I'm going to just go ahead and flip. And now what you may be able to see is that now you have a jewel. Where there was that gaping hole, now there's a beautiful purple jewel. And what we can do right away is, of course, lubricate it, as we are often doing. And then our geared lower mainspring arbor is put in place, and that gear actually interacts with our recording wheel. That's what turns the wheel. Okay. Lovely. Okay, now it's just time for the train. Let's go ahead and inspect every component prior to assembly. Make sure there's no fuzz or dirt, anything left over from the cleaning process. Everything is spick and span clean. There's another wheel we have to be very conscious of as we're building this out, and that's the intermediate wheel for the winding of the mainspring that has to go in. So let's not forget that. Okay, third wheel. Let's check our super important escape wheel. I'd like to put that in next. And then the ultimate component, chronograph wheel, fourth wheel combination. Okay, good. Make sure everything's clean. All right, now I have to lubricate this. Good. All right, in you go. Oops, I forgot one spot. Need to drop a lubrication on the shaft. Good. All right, now we lubricate the intermediate wheel post and put the intermediate wheel in place. Here it is. Right. Without that, we don't have winding. All right, let's just check all of our components, make sure they're nice and clean. We got any detritus? All right, now our train bridge. Top of our arbor. Now this only locates the third wheel and the escape wheel. The location of the upper shaft of the chronograph wheel is in the other plate, so we have to wait till we wind in any power. All right, 3 screws. I like to maintain a little bit of pressure here, and then I check. I check and I check and I check. I want to be 100% sure that everything's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Okay, we're not quite there. That's the thing. We need to check again. That's why we do this. Because if we don't, we can end up in big trouble. Because that is not where it's supposed to be. And if it's not, that's a problem. Let's take that off. Oops. Alright, what's going on? There we go. Now we're down. Come on. Alright, let's take that screw back out. This is why we do this. It's because we don't want anybody in the wrong position. Luckily, we didn't twist or push too hard. Okay, so let's try that again. Everything looked good, but it wasn't quite right. much simpler than that. It is the movement holder holding everything back. How funny. You'll hear an audible click when everybody falls into place properly. There it is. Okay, train runs free. Yep, we're good. Okay, so let's do that. Because of the length of the resetting lever, you gotta be careful where it actually interacts with the top of the movement holder. Something I have forgotten, clearly. Okay, so now, there we go, nice and free. And this is flat, good. You gotta take real precautions. Every time you're tightening up a screw, it can lead to issues. That's good. Last one. Okay. All right, now it's time to lubricate. Upper jewels. These two here. Third wheel and escape wheel. And they get a cover. It is right here. Yep. Also acts as a bushing, lower bushing for the intermediate wheel for your minute counting wheel. Okay. All right, now it's chronograph components after we get the click and the ratchet wheel in place. So here's your click. Well, no. And never quite clear what kind of screw Seiko is going to put in this location. It's always a bit of a crapshoot. This one is a screw that's identical to those who hold in the pallet lever. Oops, bridge. But sometimes it's a very oddly shaped head, somewhat smaller. Oh my goodness. It really just depends on the year and the make of the movement, or the model, I should say. All right, let's go again. U and they're always a challenge. The click in place, and then we tighten the screw. Right. Next is the ratchet wheel. On the chronographs, these are bi-directional. It doesn't matter which way they go. Upside down, there's no upside down, there's no right side up. On the other 6000 series though, that's not the case. They're not flat. With a dome. All right, hold the pegwood into the gear, and then we tighten up just a touch. Good. All right. Now we got to lubricate all of the pivots for the components. It's here, and here, here, and we gotta lubricate the levers, all the actuating pieces. Let's get a little more heavy-duty grease-style lubrication. They take a bit of a beating, so they need to be well lubricated here. I usually try and put some on the plate. Okay. All right, now our column wheel gets a bushing. And then, of course, lubrication. And the column wheel itself needs to be lubricated. A couple of points. It interacts with fairly high friction, so it goes in place. Right. Move its spring. Oops. There we go. And then its retaining screw. It's not actually a screw that's tight, it's just one that allows us to rotate. So it's bottomed out before it touches. Right. Now for operating levers. Make this easy. All right. There's one. And now this lever interacts through this pin, which goes to the other side. It's always a bit of a struggle to get that right. Hopefully this time will be different, but I doubt it. Not too bad. Okay. Now we have to lubricate that intersection point. Good. And it gets two screws. One is a screw with a offset shaft. Holds the tips. And then a flat screw that holds this lever in place. Okay. Now we need a spring. And let's go ahead and put our hammer. Oops, excuse me. Sorry about that. Put our hammer in place, our reset hammer. That also needs some lubrication. So where it interacts with the hearts, there's lubrication, and on its pivot shaft, there's also lubrication. And then that's its, let me actually remove some excess. It's right here. Okay. Now, there are two springs. One that controls the return of the operating levers to their open position. Right here. It goes to the operating push button. And then there's the smaller spring that operates the hammer. Oops, there's part of the return on the hammer. All right, spring. Why did you This one just sits right here and then loops around there and then right here. And that's it. Make sure everybody's tight and in place. And now we can put your minute recording wheel and its intermediate wheel in place. A little bit of lubrication. No lubrication on the intermediate wheel, but the minute recorder gets a tiny touch. It has to travel through 2 plates. There's that, and then on the A movements, this wheel is staked to this upper plate, which I don't know why they changed it, but they did. Okay, well that's all the chronograph components built. Now we have to put on the chronograph bridge. It gets a little lubrication before we start on the heavy reset lever of the hammer. And then it falls into place and hopefully aligns everybody. These are a little floppy, so they're kind of a pain. As you can see, this one's already out of its bushing. Which to me is evidence enough that you should probably keep this staked to that bridge, but that's a 50-year-old conversation that we're not having with Seiko at the moment. But okay. Okay. Put this on the hammer. Expecting a little more action out of the chronograph, I have to say. It was a little underwhelming. There we go. May have to adjust that. Okay. Luckily there is room for adjustment. So let's go ahead and place a screw and then we'll take a look. Doesn't look too bad. Check our function here. Okay. That's not good. Why is that not rotating? That should have moved. Alright, let's go back apart here. Something's not quite as it should be. Again, we gotta check everything as we go. This should be out and disengaged. Why is it not? What's the holdup? It's odd. Doesn't seem to want to rotate as much. Okay, well, we'll have to check the adjustment once we get it back together. Hopefully it's just an adjustment. Come on. This intermediate whale is so annoying sometimes. But that's okay. Has a job to do. And that is all in good spots. So let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, that looks fine. Oh, sorry. What in the world is happening? Okay. Well, I'm not so convinced that that's ideal. Seems as though that lever is not quite as pushed out as it should be. well, we'll have to continue to take a close look. Let's lubricate this jewel and our minute wheel pivot. I like to run the train just a little, just to be sure that things are getting lubricated and the lubrication is working its way around. Okay, we'll come back. Okay, so now that we've gotten the movement totally assembled and running, at least on the train components, it's time to start to reassemble the calendar side. And so that involves the day and date wheels, and on this one, just the components that operate that, because we've already built out the keyless works. On a normal chronograph, well, on a 6139 chronograph from this family, it's actually a little bit more complicated on the calendar plate, but this one it's quite simple, so it's very quick. And then we're off to dial and hands, and then casing the watch. So a few components here. There's a couple gears for the date mechanism. So what I've been doing is monitoring the advancement of the train. And so this heart right here, that component is the hour recording wheel. And it's a friction-based resistance to movement when the chronograph is off. So right now we're in a, I believe, chronograph off state, which means that this heart should be pointing. Actually, I think we're in the on state, so let's go ahead and turn it off. There we go. And then we can reset. Well, I don't ever like to push too hard, but we can reset this heart here. And what that does is that puts that heart into that position there, which should be pointing right at that notch. And so when we do that, we know that if we watch over time, that not moving means that we've got everything adjusted properly in the hour recording wheel. If we don't, we have an adjustment screw here that helps us with the eccentric that holds the spring in place to make sure that this is held in its friction setting when things aren't running. Okay. So let's get the automatic date components. Put on the Millennium Falcon here. And screw. All right. So here's the date jumper. Goes here. And we put a little bit of lubrication on its end to help it with pushing the date wheel around. Here's our date wheel. So I like to just slide that into place, and then we can have the jumper hold it in until we get its plate installed, like so. Alright, so here's the first retaining plate. You have to make sure you're going through the right holes for the chronograph components. plate. And it's single screw. Okay. Now we can put the day wheel, which is in this case a English Roman wheel. This jumper goes here, like so. And then the C-clip, which goes, of course, chamfered side down, so that the next lucky watchmaker can make sure that it's removable. And with that clipped into place, we can check function. So that's 2 clicks. All right, quick day, quick date. So interesting. This watch must have been on primarily on the wearer's wrist on the Roman day, because you can see there are patches of fade that are not on the English. It's so cool. It's so cool. All right, check function one more time. It's good to be sure. Okay, let's go to the standard advancing of the date, and that works. Okay, so that's the movement essentially completed to the point where we can start to put the dial and hands on and finish with the service. Make sure we're visible here. All right, so that's a process that's a little bit complicated, but what I'd like to do is, first of all, I'd like to show everyone the back of the dial here. So this is a 6-1, and the back of our case is a 6-2. So that means that this is the original dial for this watch. The gap should be roughly a month. Sometimes it's a little more, sometimes it can't be much less, except for if they're on the same exact month. But 6 is the year, 76 for this case, and 1 is January for the dial, and 2 is February for the watch back. So that's reassuring. So whoever gets this watch knows that it is an original dial for this watch. The hands are original too. They're not, of course, they're not dated, but they have all of the hallmarks of a original handset from this era and from this watch. So I'm assured that they are correct. Okay, so let's go ahead and get the dial back on. I'll be back and we'll see what that came out. Okay, so now we've got dial and hands in place. I use this special holder that allows me to actuate the chronograph features, but what's really important is being able to reset the chronograph, but also being able to hold the hammer and all the other components against the hearts that reset the wheel, the chronograph hands, and that way you can put the hands on without anything turning. So you have to hold this in place, and then you can put the hands of the chronograph on without them rotating, because they're free to rotate. So now we've got chronograph function. We've got, of course, time advancement. Now I've left the hands on this particular watch as they are. They have some, age spots, if you will, but I think it's actually, better than relooming. I don't think that relooming is the right approach for a vintage watch. There's no reason to relume them. There's no advantage, in my opinion, other than aesthetics. But if you're interested in the watch being original, to me, the most important thing is keeping the lume in place from the factory as much as possible. If it's destroyed, yes, you have to think about it. But overall, I would say that leaving lume in place is probably the better choice. All right, so let's check how this clicks over. Good. Okay. Now, we're not going to see much motion on the chronograph hour recording wheel because it's trying to record hours, but certainly we'll get the minute recording going around. Okay, so let's now proceed to case the watch. And with these, having the outer tacky bezel means that you want to align this as well as you can with the watch itself. And so I leave the bezel off, I put the glass in, and then the bezel goes on after the watch is cased. So we're going to save that to the end. One of the trickiest things about 6138s is that having a split winding pinion, you have to be a little bit careful about how you remove the winding stem. It can put the winding pinion in a bit of a bad position, and then you got to take the whole watch apart, at least the front side, to get everything lined back up again. I think we did okay this time. Okay, so let's go ahead and get the watch cased. All new gaskets on all the important parts here. Go ahead and get the, let's take one more quick. Don't want to rush this part. Nobody wants to look at their watch and see a big old hair on the dial. One more thing. I want to lubricate our stem. You can do this while you're assembling, but I always wait till the last moment. That way I'm not pulling lubrication on and off as we go. So I put some of our heavy duty grease on our winding stem. And it's got a brand new seal. So now we go in, and there we go. Flip over the case. All right, so now I'd like to put in our movement retaining ring, its associated spring. Okay, this drops into place. We'll have to manipulate it a little bit as we put the rest of the components together, but all right. So now we're winding ball bearing piece. Let's put our plate, our spacer here. All right, and our Paul lever reduction gear. Such an ingenious design by Seiko. Very few components that lead to winding. Oops. Okay. So this drops into place. All right. Now for our handy dandy Paul lever. Be sure to lubricate this, but you have to be careful. You want to lubricate it in the right areas so that the lubrication doesn't seep down into the movement, because this should not get the heavy-duty lubricant that the Paul lever does. Adjust Make sure that the levers are on the induction wheel. Check for function, which looks good. Put a slight drop of lubrication before we forget. And then we have two distinct screws with their own pitch and diameter that are only used for this component, although they look exactly the same as the ones that are for the bridge that holds the pallet fork in place. They are their own separate size. Alright, so now we lubricate the ball bearings. As much as possible without being too generous. And clean up any excess on the top. And with that, we can go ahead and put our very clean winding weight. And now our case back. Make sure everybody's happy. Oh, almost forgot. Two very important pieces here. So our springs go in first. And then our push buttons for chronograph. Follow, and you lift the retaining ring, push your chronograph buttons in, and then release. Those hold it in place, and that's how these are held. Looks pretty good to me. Okay. Now the last thing we have to do is align our bezel to our face of our watch, and then we are finished. So we'll press that in place with a tool, and that will be the finished watch.